are running away to China. They're going to cities like Chengdu, capital of Sichuan province, so they can hide there in the middle of the Chinese population and not get bothered by the police. And I'm not making this up. You ask people from Lhasa. And of course, the city is just now, it's completely ruined. Prostitution, like you wouldn't believe it. They bring, Chinese entrepreneurs bring prostitutes from Sichuan province, very young girls from villages, 14, 15, 16, for the tourists. The whole Tibetan Lingkor, which is the outer circuit where people used to walk around to accumulate merit, as we say, or prostrate, it's all dotted with these brothels. Very, and it's not even like glamorous or anything like this. It's very sad, shabby. Village girls with sort of crooked makeup, looking for business. Nightclubs, the most tawdry kind. Karaoke, that's the city. And everyone drinking, fighting, violence like you wouldn't believe out in the street. People have just somehow lost their sense of being human beings. Real violence, all the time. Kids drinking in the street. 10, 11-year-old, 8-year-old with bottles of beer. Alcoholism, You ask, I have friends in Lhasa, and you ask, where's so-and-so these days, and the answer is, he's rolled away these days. Rolled away means he died of alcoholism. Because when you drink, you tend to roll in the dirt. Babri theso. Chichi, what's happened to so-and-so? And the Tibetan said, Babri theso. That means he's drunk too much, he's died. And it's really sad because, like for Americans, you might think, there's always a comparison with Native American. And in Australia with the indigenous people. But we are not like that. That comparison cannot be made because, let's say, the Native Americans were not a drinking culture. Alcohol was a new thing, and that's why it affected them so tremendously. In Australia, Tibetans it's a drinking culture. We not only drink, but it's like, it's a regular part of Tibetan life. We even offer up, the best beer that we make must first of all be taken to the temple to be offered to the Buddha and to the gods. But I'm sure there were alcoholics in Tibet in the past, but there's a kind of a natural kind of balance, a moderation in our drinking. But now people are drinking like there's no tomorrow. So there are reasons for why Tibetans are coming out now, taking drastic steps, to fight against the Chinese occupation of Tibet. Unless this changes, people feel that Tibetans as an identity will be lost completely. Right now, Tibetans are not being killed like in the past, like in the 60s and 70s where they gunned us down. It's not like pure genocide as they did in those days. Right now, it's much more subtle. It's economics, it's alcoholism, it's loss of jobs, no jobs for Tibetans, losing your land, and being marginalized in a way where they're gradually pushing you to a kind of functional extinction. So sometimes the Tibetan government says, genocide, it's not, genocide isn't exactly the word, but they are pushing us to sort of, become extinct by ourselves. So this is the reality that the young people in Tibet seem to have realized, kind of instinctively, and are now coming out, lighting themselves on fire to demonstrate, and not necessarily to the world, but it's to the Chinese, that we are not going to live under it. And it's been hugely effective. It's changed so many things within the Tibetan exile community. Now the Tibetan independence movement is much stronger. People have realized there is no other way. We cannot live under the Chinese. Whether we're going to get independence or not is not something that we can predict. We are not in that business of predicting. But it is a struggle that we must keep up. We absolutely must keep up. Just to survive as even if we don't get Tibet as a country back immediately, just to survive as a, as our own unique identity with our own history, we have to keep fighting the Chinese. And this is even for Tibetans here in this, in the United States. I know some Tibetans who say, look, I don't want to talk about China, like, I just want to live with my children peacefully in the US. And it's not a bad thing, right? Just get a job and just live my life. But they won't let you alone. The Chinese won't let you alone even in the United States. When you go demonstrating, they try to get the Tibetan government to, in exile, to stop the people in the West demonstrating. 2 or 3 occasions. Like, once I was giving this talk in Washington, D.C., and there was this Congressman, Wolf, who had actually helped this lady, this Uyghur activist, Rabia Kadir. He had gotten her out from Chinese prison. She was one of the major human rights activists there. And he had gotten her out and to the United States. He was her main sponsor. And she was living in Virginia. She and her family managed to get out. He said one night she called him, please come. And he went rushing. What? She said, the Gonganchu, the Chinese secret police are here. And he couldn't believe it. He thought, what's going on? So he went there. He said, sure enough, outside her house, there were 2 cars. And just people, in the car, and they're not doing anything, but they're just looking at her. Just to tell her, we're here, They're from the Chinese consulate. He got the FBI, he got the local police to chase them away. But they're there. Even in schools. I'd send my kid to a school up in the mountains of Tennessee. It's a private school. There are about 20 Chinese students there from mainland China, Communist Party boss. It's a very good Episcopalian school. And the Chinese teacher there was insisting that my daughter not talk about Tibetan independence. She did an art project with Tibet. And nothing against the Chinese students or anything, but there's a huge fuss. And of course it made me mad also. So I went to the school principal. I said, this is the United States. We came to this country because we thought it's a free country. But if you're just going to let the Chinese get away with this, I'm going to make a stink about it. So finally they let put back my girl's art project. They gave her an opportunity to express herself. But they'll put pressure on you. Gradually, and they're getting more and more powerful. They are in your computers already. So this is where I think it's really important for us, as a community even if we don't like each other all that much all the time. We may have problems, differences here and there. We have to hang in there together because of what's happening. These days, the Chinese, I don't think there's any consulate here, but what's happening in Zurich is they're insisting all Tibetans come to their Chinese New Year festival. And Tibetans don't know what to do. Before they'd say no, but now, if they want visas to go back home, they have to go there. And then the embassy takes photographs and takes videos and shows people back in Tibet that now, even our compatriots outside, they're like mind with us. So there are all these enormous problems that we face, but I think the inspiration that we must take is from all these young people who take this most painful and difficult way, to try to wake us up. That's all they're doing. But they're literally keeping up the flame of Tibetan freedom, trying to wake us up. So even if we can't do something immediately, just organizing something like this, which you've done, thank you so much, is a wonderful beginning. And I think we can go on from there, strength to strength, and get our country back. Thank you very much. Tibetans have, it is, first of all, a totally traditional country. It was,
when we were independent. And first of all, it had started off as a military empire, and gradually it become, under different lamas, and finally the Dalai Lamas, it had become a theocratic country. But the thing is, so much of Tibetan tradition is defined by what we have in our kind of Tibetan, by law, which is there, which is written, by also Tibetan culture, and by our literature, religious literature, lay literature. So in terms of documents, government proclamations, if that's what you mean by birthright, like we don't have an exact equivalent of the Magna Carta, but there are many, many, many different government proclamations which sort of add up to a kind of a Tibetan judicial history. For instance, the 13th Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama preceding this one, in 1896, when he came into power, he declared Tibet, to be that they, what we say, like the death penalty in Tibet was completely abolished. Just a few years after that, a Russian explorer, Tsikov, he wrote an account for the Russian Royal Geographical Society where he mentions that this is one of the things that the 13th Dalai Lama had done. I have 9 different citations. I think I mentioned that in a little, the pamphlet that I've written you, where the 13th Dalai Lama's new law on human rights was enacted. Was it perfect? No. All laws, even if you may have the best of intentions, it cannot be implemented fully in a few years. So there were some problems. But eventually, this was the law of the land. So Tibet was one of the first countries in the world, in spite of the fact that, this must be admitted, we were not a democracy, we were not a modern country, but a lot of things were unfair. So, but there were things like this done in Tibet, not only in terms of law for human being, but it was one of the first countries in the world where you had actual environmental laws that were actually drafted and written out and sent to all the districts in Tibet and read out to the population to ensure that people didn't hunt too much, didn't fish too much, didn't destroy the environment that they lived in. These documents are still available. You can go to archives in Dharamsala, and even inside Tibet, it's still there. You can get that. So there we have a birthright, a tremendous birthright of what we were. Everything is not perfect, people keep changing. So I'm sure, like right now, the Dalai Lama himself has declared that he has left his office, he has left power, and he wants the Tibetans to work on a democratic system within the exiled community, which could be, in the future, transplanted into Tibet. So yes, in that sense we are, yes, a birthright country. This is the first time I've actually heard of that term. Thank you. Yes, sir. Right now it's very, very difficult, especially because of the Himalayas. Western tourists these days practically don't get there. I had one American lady who just managed to sort of get in, and really difficult for her to come out. And she was nearly in tears when she came out. She said, Asa was like terrible. But first of all, there are no ancient, this is the capital of an ancient state. You don't have a single representative of the international media there. Nothing, zero. No Al Jazeera, nothing. No CNN, nothing. These days you don't even have NGOs. Now forget Human Rights Watch and forget Amnesty, it's like people go. You don't have Médecins Sans Frontières there. You don't have things like even Save the Children Fund. They left a few years ago. They harass, they don't go out of their way just to kick out this Western organization because, it'll make news in the West, huh? But they harass them to a point where they leave voluntarily. So it's really difficult. For Tibetans, it changes from time to time. Once they even asked me, the Communist Party chairman in Lhasa, he sent me a letter through the Dharamsala government saying I should stop writing my anti-Chinese articles, which he said was like the beating of a fly's wing against a rock. It gets very poetic. And he said instead I should come back to work to rebuild, Tibet, build socialism. So sometimes there is that, but these days even Tibetans, I think, if any of you have tried, you know how difficult it is now. No, because now they're really scared about the self-immolations. It's really upsetting people in China. It's gotten to a point where, in Tiananmen Square, and in China, that's the main square where you had the uprisings. This is the thing that people have noticed, and one of the main things that they have a little kind of Buddhist box, booth. The people up, on the side, they have these fire extinguishers. They're scared some Tibetans going to come there and burn themselves. In Lhasa, in the main square, in the Bako square, there are cops with fire extinguishers. So the immolations have made them very nervous because this is something, they know this is what happened in the Arab Spring. One guy burned himself, and this happened in the Arab world. Now if this happens in Tibet, what's going to happen in the rest of China? Because the Chinese people themselves, except for the very rich ones, are living in tremendous, with huge suffering, problems. The economy of China, of course, everyone sort of, oh wow, China's economy, wow. But it's come at a tremendous cost. Most of these industrial areas in China, all the, the riverine sort of cities, where they have these factories, every one of these cities are like what they call, nearly everyone is a cancer city. 60–70% of the population in these places have cancer because of pollution. The rivers are polluted. Some of the most exotic colors, purple, dark blue rivers. People have to live there. They don't know what to do. And now there's a real problem in China is, okay, this is a little extra information, but I shouldn't go into this sort of detail, but there's a whole, housing bubble in China. Our economy here in the United States took this huge downturn. The major sort of reason was, the housing bubble burst. Real estate bubble in China is hundreds of times bigger now than what you had in the United States. They are building 10 to 25 new cities every year, which are empty. Because most of the apartments are too expensive for Chinese people to afford. And people are buying them as investment. You save money, and what do? You can't put in a bank because banks give no returns these days in China. The stock market in China is like, it's just a roller coaster ride. So best thing, buy a house. That's traditional. Huh? $400,000–$500,000 apartments for people who are being paid like $500 a month. So how can you afford that? So all the houses are empty. They just bought to flip, and then profession. And the money is there because Chinese government has been giving out loans just to keep the economy growing. They're building infrastructure, houses and bridges and trains that, high-speed trains that people can't afford to ride, except for the rich people. So all that money, and someone's going to ask for the money back in a few years. There's real fear in China. And that, on the top of this, then you have the problem like in Tibet, where you actually have a person coming out and saying the system is wrong, tear it down. So this is very scary times for the Chinese government. But this is the hope that we Tibetans have, that from this, not only can Tibetans go back to their homeland, but that the Chinese people, for the first time, they might have, real freedom and a democratically elected government. Yes, sir. you know, all the other ethnic minorities in China, the most effective actually Tibetans and then the Hui, you know, the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs have running battles with the police, and but it's the fact that some of the Uyghurs joined the Taliban, you know, in Afghanistan. Not that they were in any way jihadis, but they were just looking for training and a way to get weapons. So there was some problem with the American administration. But I think people have understood this. That's why, you know, the Uyghurs managed to get out of Guantanamo, and they've been sent to some nice island, I don't know, somewhere, not to the United States. So Tibetans generally get on with, you know, when we go to what they call minority institutions in China, in Beijing, Chengdu, there's schools for ethnic groups. Always the Hui and the Tibetans hang out together. There's a lot of friendship, although the religion is different. But out here in exile, we don't really have a kind of political program. That, you know, I've tried to meet them a few times, and you know, I think Tibetan government before attempted, you know, some way of, you know, what they had something called the Common Front of. Gentlemen, do you remember the term that they had? Iptikan from Germany, you know. I had organized a declaration of independence of the nations of High Asia, you know, from Mongolia, from Inner Mongolia, from Uyghurs, Tibetans, Manchus. We got together in Washington, D.C. Some congressman was sort of favorable to the Tibetan. He lent us a committee room, so it gave it a little class, and we sort of made our announcement there. But the problem right now is that the Tibetan government in exile doesn't want to do, you know, any of this, because it doesn't want to provoke the Chinese. There's this hope in the Tibetan official world that the Chinese might give us something, a little bit of autonomy. There's this hope. I think it's completely illusory. It's delusional even, I think I could say. But they do have this hope. And so far, you know, we've sent, I think, 19 delegations, you know, to try to negotiate with China. And nothing has come out of it. In fact, you know, like Tibetan, the last delegation they went to were completely humiliated, you know. So you're right, we have to, you know, the main thing I think for Tibetans is we must be able to build our case in the world for an independent Tibet. As hard as it may be, people say, China, how can you deal with this? They've got all the money in the world. You know, America's not going to pay attention, the UN's not going to pay attention. Forget the big guys, you know. If you go to Obama and ask him, he's going to say no. And then you're going to get disappointed. Bottom up, grassroots, I think that's the way to go. Just make people aware that Tibet was once an actual independent country. This is not one of these troublesome little things like in the Middle East. You know, Palestine was not a nation before. You know, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. It was a district. But Iraq wasn't really a nation. But Tibet was, you know, from the 6th century onwards. And we can provide the documentation, you know, and it's an interesting place on the top. It's a way, you know, you can sell it to even to the kids. You know, like whenever you talk of Tibetans, maybe, you know, like with school children, they always feel Tibet's so cool, you know. They want to know about it. Yaks and horses and stuff like that. So there's a way in which I think the case for an independent Tibet could be not only presented to the world, but could be made to, you know, gradually it becomes like common knowledge. It's Tibet independent, of course, yeah, you know, what's the problem? And that's, I think, is a huge starting point. Because let's say anything happens in China tomorrow or day after, some huge crisis. And then we have to work all over again to, you know, to talk about Tibetan independence. It's going to take too much time, and we might lose a wonderful opportunity, right? So from